Michael Harrison, the most demanding and perfectionist executive in Manhattan, exploded with rage when he saw the new nanny carrying his newborn son in a cloth sling while cooking. "This is savage!" he shouted, pointing at how young Sarah held little Jake against her chest while moving around the kitchen. "We're not primitives. Put that baby in his crib like you're supposed to." Michael was convinced she was an ignorant and incapable girl, hired out of desperation after all the professional nannies had quit within weeks. But what Michael didn't know was that Sarah was hiding a devastating secret. She was a specialized pediatrician, forced to work as a nanny for reasons no one could imagine. And her savage method wasn't just saving his son's life, but would soon reveal a shocking truth about Jake's health problems that all the previous doctors had completely ignored. Michael Harrison embodied the essence of Manhattan success. At 38, he ran the American division of a pharmaceutical multinational, lived in a $3 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, and his existence followed the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Every detail of his life obeyed elevated standards and rigid protocols that had guaranteed him an impeccable career. His home perfectly reflected his personality. Clean lines, neutral colors, Scandinavian furniture, cutting-edge technology. No space existed for chaos or improvisation. Even after the birth of his son Jake 6 months earlier, Michael had maintained the same standards of absolute perfection. His wife Jennifer had died during childbirth from unforeseen complications. In one night, Michael found himself a widower and single father, but he had faced even this tragedy with the same methodical approach he applied to everything else. He had hired the best professional nannies, installed the most modern newborn monitoring systems, transformed a room into a nursery that looked like it came from a design magazine. However, a crucial problem persisted. No nanny lasted more than a few weeks. They all left with different excuses, but Michael was convinced it was because of his high standards. He demanded precise routines, fixed schedules, scientific methods for everything: feeding, sleeping, playing, even diaper changes. Jake was an extremely difficult baby. He cried incessantly, slept little, seemed always restless and agitated. The most expensive and renowned pediatricians in Manhattan that Michael consulted said it was normal, that some newborns were more sensitive than others. Michael religiously followed all their advice, but the situation constantly worsened. That November morning, when the doorbell rang, Michael opened it, expecting yet another professional nanny from the city's most exclusive agency. Instead, he found a girl who looked like she'd just left college. About 25 years old, brown hair in a messy ponytail, jeans and a simple blue t-shirt, a backpack on her shoulders instead of an elegant suitcase. Michael evaluated her with immediate skepticism. This girl didn't match the image of the perfect nanny he had in mind. Too young, too informal, too normal. She showed no visible references or professional certificates, but the agency had sent her, and he was desperate after the last 3 nannies had quit rapidly. As Sarah Mitchell introduced herself and entered the apartment, Jake began crying from the nursery. Michael stiffened. It was feeding time. The baby had to follow the predetermined schedule with military precision. He headed toward the kitchen to prepare the bottle with the scientifically calculated formula, explaining to Sarah the importance of rigid routine. He stopped when he turned and saw that she had already taken Jake from the crib and was placing him in a cloth sling extracted from her backpack, instead of bringing him to the designated high chair. Michael watched incredulously as she moved around the kitchen with his son, tied to her chest, preparing something while speaking gently to the baby. Jake had stopped crying immediately, something that never happened during feeding time. Michael's indignation exploded when he saw this scene he considered primitive and dangerous. He accused Sarah of being savage, of endangering his son, of behaving like a tribal mother instead of a modern professional. Sarah stopped and looked at him with calm determination, explaining that skin-to-skin contact regulated the baby's heartbeat, stabilized body temperature, reduced cortisol levels. Michael interrupted abruptly. ordering her to put Jake in the crib and follow the routines established by Manhattan's best pediatricians. But while protesting vehemently, Michael couldn't ignore one disturbing fact. Jake hadn't made a single complaint since Sarah had picked him up. For the first time in 6 months, his son seemed genuinely calm and peaceful. The following days transformed the house into a continuous battlefield between Michael and Sarah. Every rule he established, she seemed to have a scientific reason for doing differently. When Michael insisted on bottles at fixed times, Sarah proposed feeding on demand. When he demanded that Jake sleep in the perfectly arranged crib, she suggested co-sleeping to improve natural sleep cycles. But what irritated Michael most was that damn baby carrier. Sarah used it constantly. While cooking, cleaning, walking around the house, Jake always appeared calm when against her chest, but Michael found all this primitive and completely inappropriate for a modern home. One evening, Michael complained on the phone to his sister Lisa that he didn't understand why hire a nanny if she had to carry the baby around all the time like hippie mothers from communes. Lisa, always more pragmatic, asked him directly how Jake was doing. Michael hesitated because the truth made him uncomfortable. Jake was undoubtedly better than he had ever been. He slept more, cried much less, seemed more serene and relaxed, but he refused to admit that Sarah's savage methods could actually be effective. What Michael ignored was that Sarah had noticed details that none of the expensive pediatricians had ever observed. The specific way Jake reacted to certain sounds, how he stiffened his body in particular situations, the small tremors when he was overstimulated. She methodically documented all these behaviors in a detailed diary, but hadn't yet revealed anything to Michael. One morning, Michael returned home early for forgotten documents. He entered silently and heard a sweet voice singing from the kitchen. He approached and discovered a scene that left him completely speechless. Sarah was sitting at the table with Jake on her lap, not in the sling this time, but resting against her facing outward. In front of her, she had arranged colored objects with scientific precision. Red rattle, soft fabric, small mirror. She was carefully observing every reaction of the baby, noting details in a notebook. Michael saw that when Sarah moved the red rattle too quickly, Jake immediately stiffened and began crying. She put the object away, murmuring that it was too stimulating, and noted it accurately. When Michael approached, curious despite himself, Sarah turned surprised. She explained that she was observing how Jake reacted to different stimuli, tracking behavioral patterns she had noticed. Michael looked at the notebook, full of precise observations, detailed drawings of Jake's reactions, annotations more scientific than anything he'd seen from the consulted pediatricians. It was more methodical and accurate than all the previous expensive medical exams. Sarah explained that Jake might be more sensitive than average, not necessarily a serious problem, but an explanation for the difficulty in calming him until now. Constant contact through the sling helped him regulate his nervous system, allowing him to remain calm long enough to process the surrounding world. For the first time in weeks, Michael sat down and really listened to what Sarah had to say. And what he heard made him begin to question everything he thought he knew about caring for his son. That evening, after Jake fell asleep peacefully, Michael found Sarah at the kitchen table with the notebook open, surrounded by books he'd never seen before. They were specialized medical texts, neurological development in infants, sensory processing disorders, early intervention strategies. When Michael asked where these books came from, Sarah looked up with uncertainty in her eyes for the first time. She confessed that she wasn't just a nanny, but a pediatric doctor specialized in neurological development disorders. Michael stared at her incredulously as she explained her situation. A year earlier, she had made a devastating mistake, a difficult case, a premature diagnosis, terrible consequences. She had temporarily lost her medical license during an investigation, and working as a nanny was the only way to continue being around children. Sarah revealed that everything she had done with Jake was an unofficial medical evaluation. Jake showed clear signs of sensory hypersensitivity, Nothing serious, but explaining his agitation with rigid routines and positive response to constant physical contact. Michael examined the notebook Sarah reopened. Pages of detailed observations documented how Jake calmed with reduced light, reacted negatively to sudden sounds seeking physical contact, slept better in vertical position, suggesting possible undiagnosed reflux. Michael began connecting the painful pieces. Previous nannies fleeing because they couldn't calm Jake, doctors diagnosing normalcy after brief visits, his attempts to impose rigid routines that worsened everything. Sarah explained that the sling helped Jake regulate his overloaded nervous system. Hypersensitive babies like him felt overwhelmed by the external world, and constant physical contact helped them process stimuli without going into total overload. Regarding feeding, a baby with reflux like Jake needed small, frequent meals, not large quantities at predetermined times, remaining in vertical position after eating. Michael ran his hands through his hair, realizing how blind he had been. All his scientific methods were worsening his son's situation instead of helping him. Sarah explained why she hadn't revealed everything immediately. She couldn't make official diagnoses, and the last time she had given an early diagnosis, without definitive proof, she had ruined a family's life. Michael saw deep pain in Sarah's eyes.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
And understood there was much more behind her story. But at that moment, the only important thing was Jake and what they needed to do to help him. Sarah suggested taking Jake to a specialist in neurological development, providing names of trusted colleagues. Meanwhile, they had to continue with effective methods: physical contact, calm environment, frequent feeding, regardless of how savage they seemed. Michael looked at his son sleeping peacefully in the nearby crib, more tranquil than he had ever seen him. For the first time since Jake's birth, he began to believe they were finally doing things right. In the following days, Michael took Jake to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a neuropediatrician recommended by Sarah. The official diagnosis completely confirmed Sarah's observations. Jake had a mild form of sensory processing disorder combined with undiagnosed gastroesophageal reflux. Dr. Rodriguez was impressed by the precision of the documented observations, declaring that whoever had made them possessed an exceptional clinical eye. Every symptom had been recorded with impeccable scientific accuracy. When Michael returned home with the official diagnosis, he found Sarah preparing dinner with Jake in the sling, exactly like the first day. This time, instead of getting irritated, Michael felt deeply grateful. Sarah smiled, showing more relief than surprise at the medical confirmation. Now they could begin an official and appropriate treatment plan for Jake's specific needs. Michael insisted on knowing the truth about her past, declaring that she had saved his son, and he had the right to know who she really was. Sarah began telling with a low voice the painful story she had tried to forget. There had been Emma, a 3-year-old girl brought by parents for aggressiveness, sleep problems, food refusal. The symptoms were compatible with both autism and psychological trauma. Instead of waiting, doing more tests and prolonged observations, Sarah had acted impulsively to help immediately. She had suggested that Emma might be a victim of abuse, activating social services. The diagnosis proved tragically wrong. Emma had an undiagnosed brain tumor, and the problematic behaviors were neurological symptoms, not psychological ones. When they finally discovered the tumor, it had progressed too far and the child didn't survive. The family was devastated twice. First, by the incorrect diagnosis that led to months of terrible investigations, then by Emma's loss. They sued for medical malpractice, and although technically Sarah hadn't violated protocols, the medical board suspended her license pending a complete investigation. Michael understood that with Jake, Sarah had had time for prolonged observations, accurate documentation, certainty before suggesting specialist consultations. She had never provided direct diagnoses, only recommendations for appropriate specialists. Michael recognized that Sarah was the best doctor he had ever met, not because she didn't make mistakes, but because she genuinely cared. Previous pediatricians had seen Jake for 10 minutes, declaring normalcy, while she had spent weeks understanding his real needs. When Sarah remembered how he had called her savage, Michael blushed, admitting his own arrogance. He had confused traditional methods with correct ones, thinking he knew everything through books and expensive consultations. But Sarah had truly seen and understood his son. Jake chose that moment to make a satisfied sound against Sarah's chest, and both smiled, realizing that in a few months, this woman had become much more than a nanny. She had become family. The following months brought profound transformations to Michael's life. Following advice from Sarah and Dr. Rodriguez's team, he began seeing Jake with completely different eyes. No longer a project to manage with corporate efficiency, but a small human being with specific and unique needs. The apartment underwent gradual but significant changes. 2 bright lights were replaced with soft illumination. Noisy spaces became quiet zones. The perfect but cold nursery filled with tactile and visual elements that calmed Jake. Michael learned to use the baby carrier, initially feeling clumsy, but soon discovering the joy of constant physical contact. Jake calmed immediately against his chest, and Michael understood why Sarah had called him savage. There was something primitive and instinctive in that way of caring that surpassed all the manuals he'd read. One evening, while preparing dinner together, both alternating Jake between them, Sarah explained that baby carriers had been used in all cultures for thousands of years. Only in modern Western society had people begun thinking babies should remain separated from parents most of the time. Michael smiled, remembering how that conversation would have infuriated him months earlier. Now he found fascinating the explanations about traditional methods supported by modern science. One crucial evening, while Sarah was putting Jake to sleep with the routine of cuddles and whispered songs, Michael received the phone call that changed everything. Sarah's lawyer announced that the investigation was concluded and she could recover her medical license. Sarah stopped at the nursery door with an expression mixing relief, joy, and something that seemed like fear. When Michael confirmed that everything was finished and she could return to practicing medicine, she sat heavily still, holding Jake, confessing she didn't know if she was ready. Their relationship had evolved from professional to something much deeper during those months. Sarah didn't just care for Jake, but for both of them, and Michael had developed feelings he hadn't felt since Jennifer's death. Michael gently asked what she really wanted. Sarah expressed the desire to continue helping children, but the fear of causing new damage. Michael showed her what she had done for Jake, transforming a constantly agitated baby into one who slept peacefully. Michael suggested she could open a private practice specialized in prolonged consultations, not having to return to the traditional model of brief visits. With his business experience and her medical competence, anything would be possible. They looked into each other's eyes, realizing they had become much more than doctor-patient or nanny-employer. They had become a team, a family, something nobody had planned, but that seemed inevitable. When Michael took her free hand asking what they were doing, Sarah replied that they were building something beautiful for all of them. Jake chose that moment to open his eyes, look at both of them, smile for the first time, then fall back asleep peacefully in Sarah's arms, as if approving what was happening. 2 years later, the Child Development and Wellness Clinic had become one of New York's most respected centers for children with special needs. Sarah had realized her dream of different medicine, prolonged consultations, detailed observations, personalized plans involving the whole family. Michael had left the pharmaceutical multinational to become the clinic's administrative director. His business experience proved perfect for creating a sustainable model that allowed Sarah to dedicate necessary time to each small patient. Jake, now 3 years old, was a lively and happy child who ran around the clinic greeting everyone. His sensory problems were completely managed through specific therapies, and understanding family environment. He had become the best testimony to Sarah's work. One morning, while Sarah was examining a girl with symptoms similar to Jake's past ones, Michael received an unexpected phone call. It was Emma's family, the child who had died years earlier from the undiagnosed tumor. The father wanted to meet Sarah. Michael expressed doubts about the wisdom of the meeting, but Sarah insisted she wanted to see the family to definitively close that painful chapter. The meeting took place at the clinic the following week. Mr. Johnson entered nervous but determined, while Michael remained present for moral support. The man explained that initially he had been angry with everyone, thinking Sarah's wrong diagnosis had ruined Emma's last months of life. But in the months following his daughter's death, he had begun understanding something crucial. All the doctors consulted before Sarah had given quick glances at Emma, declaring it was just a normal phase. Sarah had been the only one to understand that something serious was wrong. Even though her specific diagnosis was incorrect, her concern was justified. Without her insistence that Emma needed help, they probably would never have done the exams that revealed the tumor. Thanks to her, they had had 3 months to prepare, say goodbye, love their daughter consciously. Mr. Johnson had come to thank Sarah and tell her that her current approach of careful observation and personalized care was exactly what children needed. After the man's departure, Sarah remained seated in silence for long minutes. Michael asked if she could now forgive herself, and she replied that she believed it was finally time. That evening at home, watching Jake play peacefully with his favorite sensory toys, Michael reflected on the changes in their lives. He confessed he had learned that sometimes what seems savage is actually the most natural thing in the world. Sarah had taught him that authentic love and care don't follow manuals, but come from the heart. Sarah replied that Michael had taught her the possibility of starting over, that past mistakes don't have to define the future if one is willing to learn and grow. Jake ran toward them, climbing onto Sarah's lap, exactly like that first time in the carrier. But now, Michael saw nothing savage. He saw only pure love. When Jake asked if they were a happy family, Michael and Sarah looked at each other smiling. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of past sorrows: authentic love, true family, and a way to help other children, combining medical competence and human care. As Sarah hugged both Jake and Michael, confirming they were a very happy family, Michael understood that the most precious things arrive in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes what we call savage is the most civilized way to love, and salvation comes from the least expected person at the moment of greatest need. Like if you believe true love goes beyond prejudices, comment which moment of the story touched you most. Share to inspire those who believe in second chances. Subscribe for more stories of love, family, and redemption. Sometimes what we call savage is the most natural way to love. Sometimes our prejudices prevent us from seeing who can truly save us. And sometimes the most beautiful family forms when we least expect it, because true love doesn't follow manuals, but comes from the heart.